Are we live? Are we on? Welcome to Wake Up and Deliver with John and Matt.
What's going on today?
Yeah, apologies. Last week we did miss it. Reason being, I was unwell.
That's true.
And we just like, okay, we're just gonna sit in. I was actually just thinking about it when we were just doing this. I was wondering, do you think by us doing these podcasts, would you be a better public speaker now? Do you feel more comfortable on camera because we do the podcast?
I would probably say I'd be more comfortable if someone was filming it than I might have been a number of years ago. But I mean, I think the speaking part is probably not as much of a change. You know, I've had to go through and do presentations and bigger things like that throughout my career. So that one doesn't bother me as much. I think getting used to the camera though, and I think even knowing how to interact with the camera is a bit of a weird thing because of the fact that people kind of handle it differently and they don't really understand that if you want a certain presence on the screen, you have to interact with the camera a certain way. So I think that's probably the biggest learning from doing all of this.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair.
What about you? You think it made you a better speaker in general, getting used to it so much?
I think it's made me more comfortable talking to people, but only on virtual. In person, still, I'm not a good presenter. I haven't done it in a long time, so I can't say if I'm not good or not. But I'd like to try. I think it'd be interesting.
Yeah, I'd like to. I've always wanted to do class stuff, right? So I've done mentoring things, and I've supported supply chain organizations with mentoring and a lot of that kind of stuff. Virtual presentations, where you're kind of doing something and just disseminating. But I think it'd be very cool to actually be in a classroom setting, or for example, a networking event and really going through real detailed stuff, or really kind of having kind of let's call it a working session or something like that. I always enjoyed that when I was doing my continuous improvement stuff, bringing teams in and stuff like that, and kind of running the room and doing different things.
I'd have to get my OCD to calm down versus keep trying to stop to jump in and be like, hey, what about this idea? What about this idea? Kind of listen through the whole thing. On that topic, though, we're gonna go and do a reaction. I thought I would do something a little bit different.
Oh yeah.
Is it frozen?
No.
A lot of talk about the Savannah port lately as the supply chains change from the West Coast to the East Coast. So Savannah has been a highlight. This is the entrance into the Savannah port. I thought it was quite cool. We won't do the whole video because I think it's just a boat coming in the whole time, but
now and stay to the end of the video.
It's interesting though, you have these containers coming. There's like a kind of riverboat. These container ships coming in, just how massive they are, right?
Yeah, and then they're coming into a port. I'd love to go to Savannah now just to watch these boats come in, to be honest.
Yeah.
And look at that bridge, how high that bridge has to be. Or just stand on that bridge and look down on the boats coming in.
Yeah, it's wild, man, how much stuff is moving around.
I'd love to one day take a container ship across the Atlantic into Europe. I think that'd be fun.
Yeah, a few months on the boat.
I think there's a 15-dayer.
Yeah, that's true. You can get some that are kind of 15, 20 days, I think, when they're straight across.
It's pretty cool. Even the container ships there.
And actually, just the funny thing when people are looking at it, right? I think it's a funny juxtaposition where it's on the one end you've got all of this talk around quick commerce, ultra fast delivery, shooting pens around on mopeds and whatever. But this is really how the real movement of goods, this is why stuff can even get anywhere close to as cheap as it is, because of just look at how much revenue, if you think about the number of items on this ship and the number of
It's-
transactions that means, and each one of them generating a profit, and each one of them taking a small hit for the total cost of this boat, right? It just really highlights why some of these other models are just so fundamentally flawed.
well, this is the most efficient way per item to move anything, right? And as soon as you get to the last mile, like you're talking about, when you get down to the item and you move it, the cost just goes right through the roof.
Yeah, the only thing that's crazy to me is that someone thinks that, like, you go through all of this effort to get product across the world and like this to minimize your costs as much as possible, to then think that it's somehow realistic to then take that, like, $25 purchase, $35 purchase, have a guy or a woman go to the store, pick it up, go back to their car, drive it right to your house, put it on your door, leave your door, like, all with this dedicated activity. Like, it's just wild that anyone actually believes that this is remotely feasible outside of, subsidies and the long-term impact of like quick commerce is kind of like insipid in the sense of, like, the more that people use it and the more that it becomes a convenience, the more that everyone is going to pay for it, because it'll just be baked into the price. You know what I mean? Of like everything. And then you're essentially paying this tax on something that you may not even think is valuable.
Or how many efficiencies that you ran through to get that to a perfect price point, and then someone ruins it by having a $15 delivery to your location. You have to have it free, or otherwise it won't sell, because they
Like,
just have the ability to, right? And that's the bigger the challenge too with the Amazon logistics. I think we talked about it 2 weeks ago. Launching is their efficiencies. When you don't think they're after the 3PL job now, I think we're going to see Amazon really beefing it up.
oh yeah. I big time too. Well, I told you I got banned for my comments. Someone's post about that Amazon logistics network and stuff like that. But the funny thing with this is that, like, I saw someone over the weekend post in my network about quick commerce, like in China, and they're like, oh, like, all of these brands last year, or all of these companies gave away $11 billion in essentially promotions and coupons. And, the premise is like, oh, well, people are getting hooked, they're going to stay on it. And it's like, that feels super faulty to me, because it's like, are people really getting hooked on it when you essentially are paying them to use it? Because, like, this it's a big leap to think that if you had to have a certain volume by giving away $11 billion in 1 year, I don't legitimately believe that consumers are going to pick up that tab because they love the service so much. I think you and I have talked about this before, in more in the context of, like, transportation, middle mile, first mile, whatever type pricing, is that, like, no one is going to pay a premium just because, like, they like it or it kind of worked to a certain degree. You know what I mean? Like, if you've been giving it away for free and that was the offer, or heavily subsidized, and that was the offer, and that was the discount you made, and that's how you engaged your customer to win them, and that was the promise you were fulfilling, it is not logical to think that you can change your promise, i.e. start charging them a lot more money at some point, and still think that you're going to get the same user base. Like, you're fundamentally changing the like what the value proposition was.
Sorry, I had the sneezies there.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's going to come to a point where I don't know if it'll make, like, if the store was cheaper by $10-15 because you went to grab it yourself and you grabbed a whole bunch of items yourself, I think I would go to the store over getting it delivered. And there's no amount of saturation of someone else running around the whole city picking up my stuff, because it's everybody else's stuff as well, that will make it less economical than me going to do it. Because eventually there's a position where certain items you have to go to the store, like, grocery for the most part. Like, I like picking up my own apples, I like picking up the meat, you like doing those kind of activities. Some people have different things like clothing or whatever, or perfume or whatever it is. There's an activity that you enjoy with that item. Same as, I still love going to Best Buy. And you and I talked about this many times too. We still like going for the electronics. I still like going to the store and look at the TV and be like, I know I'm going to buy this, but I have to have an idea of what it looks like. And I'd buy it every time from Best Buy if it was cheaper, right? Like you have to be a price match. If it's cheaper and saves me, I can get it instantly, I'm going to grab it. And I think that's where it still kind of loses out. I think those companies competing need to step away from that final mile delivery piece and offer something different from coming into the store. Right?
Yeah. I agree, man. Like, I think this thing is going to, like, I actually like had shared with them. I'm like, I think this thing's going to blow up. Personally, I think quick commerce, the way that most people see it, is going to implode, because the thing is, you can't legitimately also believe that you're going to have all of these stressors in the world, right? People having a harder time with employment, people finding a higher time with housing, people, for example, at risk from AI, people like, with costs going up on basic necessities, and then also be like, ooh, but I think it's a good deal for $27 for a Happy Meal. Like it's not realistic. And then the one thing that quick commerce doesn't talk about at all, like, and I really hope these investors that just are pouring their money into it, like it's a, like at some point they think that they're going to get like the golden goose out of it. The biggest risk to them is that tomorrow on social media, that just starts to be viewed as uncool. Like, do you know what I mean? The trend of like, if you're doing that, you're either hurting the planet, you're doing this, you're doing that. Like,
it's very fickle.
That industry could collapse in a month if, for whatever reason, if all of the sort of Gen Z, Gen Alpha type people that are really using this big time, some of the millennials as well, if all of a sudden this started trending the wrong way, these things would just blow up.
We've talked about it multiple times, whether it was Prime drinks, whether it was those shoes that pivoted to be an AI company that you like.
Oh my God,
so, I mean, there's been very much that trend where it's instantly famous and then it just drops. And it's that fast fashion where you have to keep up with all this demand, and where it's hard to be predictive of it. As much as I'd love to see the analytics of myself, like what would the analysis say, what I'm going to buy next? Because I don't buy much. I'm very spontaneous in that fashion, right? Same as when it comes to grocery or anything. And I think most people are, once they're past being influenced by that aspect of it, right? And it'll be interesting to see how that kind of develops the next little bit, where the predictive of what you want stops being what you want, and you realize that.
Oh yeah, for sure. I think already there's a lot of things. I mean, like even the way that now, I mean, you're seeing it more in Canada, but there's a number of places that are all talking about banning social media for kids under 16 and stuff like that. It's like coming to this realization that, like, ooh, we have a generation of people that might have messed up a little bit. Like, you know what I mean? By giving them technology and access to these kinds of things, probably much younger than was good for their brains, you know what I mean? So it'll be interesting too to see, as the shift and the perception around the quality of some of these things move, because I think a lot of these quick commerce platforms thrive on people who have not fully developed their social muscle yet.
Yeah, and then and you're also seeing trends, and funny enough, in China, like we're talking about, where AI is being you can't lay off people in lieu of AI. Like, it can't be like, oh, I'm being more efficient, I gotta lay off people. And China's being very forward on that. I thought that was pretty interesting as well.
Yeah, exactly. Go. Funny that sort of like China, a country that like a lot of people have are pretty opinionated about, seems to be doing more than some of the other large markets for being like, no, we're not going to allow this to happen. You can use it, you can enhance it, but you're not just going to replace people, so to speak, with it. So I thought that was interesting too.
That I'd also like to see what, for places like we don't talk about often, is these little pop-up farmers market, or these stalls that you have where fast fashion doesn't touch upon it, where it still draws a big enough crowd, whether it's a circus or a fair, or a lot of these communal things that people still do, where it isn't part of the trendy piece, right? And that's where a lot of the cool little nuanced things would always pop up when I was growing up, and yourself, and you still see them, like when you couldn't find fidget spinners at the stores, you'd go to your local little bazaar or whatever, and you'd find them there because that's the guy that would have it, and that'd be the access to that aspect of it, right?
Yeah, I think I think a lot of things are going to change when it comes to how commerce is done and what people are doing. I probably don't have as much hope for a lot of those things. I kind of put things like a lot of those markets very generational. I really think there's going to be some big shifts as some of these younger generations come up, because I think they just view a lot of things differently. I mean, tons of talk about, I think I've seen in the last 2 weeks a dozen times the alcohol industry, like, oh my God, we've lost $830 billion in the last X because people are no longer consuming alcohol, or the younger generation's not consuming alcohol the way that previous generations would. And like, I think that kind of impact is coming to a lot of businesses / business segments.
Yeah, it's something so silly as at my own house, like my wife tries to get me socks, and I'm always like, I used to be like, I just grab whatever. Now I'm like, are they 100% cotton? Like I'm very conscious. I want to be like, I don't want no polyester in my socks. I want 100% cotton socks, and they're very hard to find. Like I was trying to find a headband the other day, for whatever reason, and I wanted to.
No, actually, I want to know the reason you were looking for the headband, because there's for sure a reason.
Don't worry about the reasons here. That's not the topic at hand. And I was trying to find this, like, whether it was a, they're not called, no, whether not handkerchief or not handkerchief, the bandana style. And
you were actually looking for a bandana.
Well, because I couldn't find a headband, right?
Really?
I couldn't find a headband that was 100% cotton.
I could see that. I could see that though, because a lot of them are using polyester because of, they'll say it's quick drying, and which it probably is, but I mean that's usually why, quick drying and whatever.
Yeah, but there's other materials that you could be using, and I couldn't find it. Socks and all this, I try to keep to that. And that trend, I hear a lot more people are about. You hear about Lululemon and the younger generation. People are pushing back because of the amount of forever chemicals that are there in the pants and whatnot. They're like, hey, people shouldn't be wearing them, especially kids, right? And you're seeing that trend starting to be more and more of a push.
Yeah, I agree, and that's what I mean, right? Like all kinds of stuff taking off and can change. It's I think like the quality or the success of a lot of businesses is going to relate to how quickly they can quote unquote pivot. I hate that word, but in the sense at the very least of responding to the market, and not just holding on to the way things were, because the thing is, once those shifts change, they usually just change.
Yep.
So I think that's interesting. I wanted to get your take on something else I thought was funny.
What's up?
Well, two things. First, I saw an article over the weekend where it said that the government here in Canada has given Canada Post another
I saw that.
650 million, something in that range, basically to stay afloat. And then I also saw something from USPS that was that they were kind of applauding themselves because they only had a $642 million loss over the last quarter. The losses, I think everyone knows, about the postal businesses, whatever. But what I think is really telling, though, is that, on the one hand, you've got like Amazon that, like you said earlier, is branching out and doing more broad scale logistics. Now you've got things like sort of the postal services that are massive players in terms of volume and what they actually handle, and they're still losing a ton of money. These four, especially in the US, USPS, FedEx, UPS, and Amazon, control so much of the market, and everyone keeps, talking about a lot of these sort of like, startup, gig work networks, these platforms and stuff, like they're going to be able to make a legitimate dent, but like half of those companies will not know what to do when USPS, for all of their size and infrastructure, is like, we got to generate another 750 million a quarter in revenue. What do we need to do to make it happen? You know what I mean? So whatever these guys are rolling around with, making, 50 million a year, 100 million a year, whatever they are, like sooner or later, all of these big four are going to have to come for them because they need it.
Yeah. So what's the take? What's the question?
Well, my take is just the fact of like, how long do you actually think a lot of these smaller sort of networks are going to continue to be able to survive in the face of these mega networks that just need the volume, one, to keep growing and one, to keep supporting the infrastructure. You know what I mean? Because they can't continue forever losing $600 million a quarter.
Yeah, I think you and I have talked about it multiple times. Any business, small specifically, going up against any massive organization like Amazon, UPS, and all those ones, and if they don't have a specific niche or a special function that they're doing quite well, are not going to be able to sustain it or be able to go against it, right? So, like you've seen, was it FedEx or UPS pivoting into healthcare very heavily?
Both.
Yeah, like extremely heavily, right? Like if you're already doing that aspect of it, they're going to be picking up you as a company. And you've seen that happen in Canada with a few healthcare provider services being picked up quickly because of that niche, right? So anytime you're doing any of those niches and you're really focused on it, I think the companies, rather than going up against you, they're going to just either offer to purchase you, or that's where you can have a real segment of the business. Where I'm struggling still is these Skip the Dishes, Uber Eats, all these kind of food delivery places bring in value outside of the metros. Because, downtown, when you're working downtown, yeah, it makes sense. But when you start getting into rural areas of elsewhere, it stops being a function of being viable at that point, right?
Yeah, I was surprised, man. I saw some stuff from Uber at the end of last week, and like I've noticed that I don't know, maybe I just hadn't seen it before, but they started some new type of content and stuff like that, where the CEO is running around to restaurants, for example, that are exclusive or on the platform and blah blah blah, like trying to play them up and give them exposure and things like that. But yeah, I mean, Uber's profitability is still there, despite the fact that ride sharing is kind of slowing down, and they were saying the meal stuff is still, increasing. The only thing that I think is a little bit probably like, advantageous to what they're presenting is that I think that from what I saw quickly of some of the results, it was at a very macro, like worldwide scale. So of course there's certain markets that are growing, you know what I mean? Especially if they finally penetrated markets where they hadn't been before, or they, made some gains. But like, I would just love to see like the US, like I'll have to look at it some more. It kind of caught my, it kind of caught my attention, but not enough that I went to look into it. Because I just struggle to see how these guys are going to be able to keep being relevant. Well, no, I shouldn't say relevant, but like effective, because like they're putting so much strain on the people. Like, I've done a number of Ubers over the last few weeks, like ride shares, and you talk to the drivers, and like none of them are like will speak super well of it. It's kind of like they're doing it to get some cash, but other than that, they're not exactly happy.
It reminds me of the Hungry Hippo as a game as a kid, right? They're just trying to gobble as much as possible to stay afloat, and then hopefully gets enough to be able to win the game. But I don't think there's enough balls in the ring for it to gobble up to make it make sense in the end. That's the challenge I keep having with those.
Yeah, or like the one good day, like in 2 weeks or something like that, kind of gets eroded by everything else. I really think they benefit from this like not treasure hunting, but this like lottery aspect of like, oh, I've had a $500 day before, I can do it again. You know what I mean? But
and then you hear the same thing from Amazon relay drivers as well. They're like chasing that, I got a good deal one time, and it's just a race to the bottom. And a race to the bottom doesn't win for any of those service providers, because the ultimate goal for these guys is to provide the value to the end consumer, and the end consumer wants to have it at zero. It'll never be at zero, so they're always trying to get as close as possible at any cost, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I don't know. I just thought these things are funny. Like there's so much like kind of like back and forth information these days with like similar positions. I don't really think there's a lot of innovation. I think you're seeing just the growth of the scale of these things. But I don't really believe it's super sustainable.
Well, I think we've seen it even with some of the friends that you and I have in common. where they're talking about their own businesses being very much a struggle, and they're not in the final mile. They're in the warehouse business. They're in the
Yeah.
middle mile, and all. They're like it's just not profitable anymore because for whatever reason, it's just not sustainable, and it's happening in a lot of places, right? Because it's that market where again you're driving to the bottom, and you're expecting it for free from your service providers, and they're just buckling and they're not able to sustain it anymore. Where before they'd be like, yeah, this makes sense. It doesn't make sense for a lot of them, and you're seeing a lot of doors close for these smaller SME style warehouse, final mile, middle mile kind of guys, just not be able to do it anymore.
Yeah, I agree. And I think you're going to continue to see a lot of smaller. I think probably you're going to see more of the middle get eroded first. There's like slightly larger, the people running around with 1 or 2 trucks are probably insulated for a bit just because they don't necessarily need as much to make it work or whatever. But anyone that has got a little bit bigger fleet, definitely people getting into the 10 to 30 trucks, I think they're really going to feel it for sure, because that's where you have like real fixed costs and just general overhead.
Yeah, but those are the majority. A lot of great trucking companies are at that size as the ones that you want to utilize at the spot market, because they're not fixated on a lane. They don't need to be running point A to point B. Those are the ones that are going to be struggling next little bit. We're starting to see that for sure.
Yeah, definitely. So either way, I mean, that was like a couple of interesting things I see there. I think a lot of this is going to have a bit of a nasty impact towards the end of the year. With obviously all of the disruption still going on in the world, in the Middle East, and challenges with the overall global economy. I think it'll be interesting this week with the U.S. president over in China this week. I think that that'll be interesting to see. That could either be better.
John, every week it's interesting. News is so interesting nowadays. Like it's you wake up, you're like, oh, what happened overnight?
Yeah.
What was said?
I definitely think though that like a back half of the year it could take a pretty decent swing by potentially what could come up this week. But I think realistically, there's always like the initial kind of positions, and then there's like, well, you didn't live up to your side, you didn't do this, and now we're going to do that instead. You know what I mean? So I still think that there's a pretty good chance for some real instability, come summer.
I think for those who were predicting or hoping that 2026 is the rebound year, I think we're seeing it for some players in the marketplace, but it's not enough for the whole supply chain yet. And you're seeing some contract rejections, but then you're also seeing a lot of customers coming back and be like, hey, I really need you to do it at X price because we can't sustain it at the new rates that you're trying to offer for us. So we might as well close doors if you can't do better.
Yeah.
And you're seeing that from a lot of the SME food guys and retailers, because they can't compete with the bigger guys with their greater efficiencies. So they're pushing back on that as well.
I agree.
On that topic,
I know I was watching, that's why I wasn't going to say anything.
I'll let you finish off with your final minute of wisdom.
I have no words of wisdom these like right now. I mean, I've told you before, I find right now much of the same. So I don't find a lot of stuff overly interesting at the moment, because it's just kind of like the same song with a different played on a different instrument, so to speak. It's still the same thing going on.
Fair enough. On that point, though, we'll let everybody go a little bit early this time. We'll make up for all those times we were over. Thanks for joining us. We'll catch you guys next week.